Hello everybody, my name is Colin McGee, I'm from ADDISS, and today I'm going to be talking to you about some very important aspects of what's happening internally in children and adults when events are happening. So the first one we're going to look at is a screen, and it's called Bad Feelings Dumped. So it's the projection of negative feelings, and this is the kind of thing that sometimes the children are coming into school, they're unhappy, something's happened at home, something's happened on the way to school, they haven't slept well, they could just be carrying some negative memories from the previous day or event, something's reminded them of something, they're feeling really uncomfortable inside. So what happens is they project those feelings outside. So here's a sort of brief display of what might happen. There is the adult, and the adult has sent a red card to the child who's unhappy, and they're coming into school. Now, as they come into school, let me just move this out of the way. As they come into school, what happens is they're feeling angry, powerless, many things like that. And they just want to get rid of those feelings. They want to dump them outside because they're uncomfortable having them. So what they do is they dump them outside. They feel a little bit better. They feel a little bit better, and they're happy. So the short version is that the feelings were taken in and they feel uncomfortable. Those negative feelings are dumped outside. And of course, if you're continually doing that, then many things can happen. But the bad feelings are outside and the child feels a lot happier. Now, the next step on this is that when we act on someone else's projected ideas, this is a similar kind of thing. The adult has the red card and is showing it to the child. The child is feeling unhappy, and he goes through the process that we just described, which is dumping the angry feelings outside. Now, the difference here is that a responsive adult who's currently feeling good, fine, enjoying the day, sees the material that's being dumped, the projections from the child, and then picks up those feelings. And then this is where the difficulty is. If the adult isn't careful, what can happen is the adult can pick up the poor feelings, the bad feelings, and those feelings can then start to, in a way, reside in the adult. This means that the adult is acting as if the feelings are their own. Now, this is unconscious. It's not something that you can plan for, but it's something that happens quite often. So if you've gone into school and you're fine and comfortable, and suddenly you've had an interaction with a young person, and then you're feeling powerless, out of sorts, questioning whether you should be doing this job, then what can happen is you may have picked up some transferred feelings, and you may be acting on those feelings as if they are your own. So two interesting things that can happen, and we're unaware of them, but you can train yourself to spot those areas. Another area is called projective identification, which is very similar. Basically, we have these two people, wonderful people. They're in school, and one's wearing horns and the other's wearing halos. Now, what this means is that the children have awarded you a pair of horns or a pair of halos, so you're an angel or a bad person. And so, obviously, if you're wearing horns, I don't trust this person, she's bad. Halos, I trust this person, she's good. Now, what that means is the child will then treat you accordingly. So this is the nice person, this is the bad person. This one looks after me and is nice to me, this one is mean and horrid. And they can go through the day like that. You as adults, professionals, will be experiencing the treatment, and you won't know why someone is really upset or angry with you, or someone thinks you're the best thing since sliced bread. Now, what happens is, sadly, that this can happen. That suddenly there's this switch, and now this person's wearing a halo. I trust her, she's good. And so we can look at her and we can say, well, she looks very honest, she looks great, she's always looking out for me. This person's a bit bad, she's dodgy. I don't trust her at all. She's mean to me, she picks on me. And so everything can just switch suddenly. And we don't know what causes the switch, if it's going to happen, when it happens. But what we do know is that the children may decide what we wear and treat us accordingly. Something to dwell on. Now, this is probably one of my favorite slides. It's what happens inside of a child during an incident. So what happens is we're going to look at this graph. Here we've got the arousal level going up and down here. This is time moving on. This path is the emotional level of the child that's involved in an incident and coming out of it at the end. So we're going to talk about basically what happens. The child is fine, they're tootling along here, they're fine, and then suddenly there are some triggers. Someone throws a piece of paper at them, someone raises an eyebrow, someone says something mean, someone hits them. The work is too complicated, perhaps it's too much noise in the room, perhaps it's too hot or too cold, and the child is getting triggered. And as they're getting triggered, their emotional level starts to climb. It climbs and climbs, and it gets to this point. Now, this point is the emotional flooded zone. This is in a way where the child is not making sensible thoughts, decisions. They're surviving, they're existing. It's the panic attack stage where they would be in this area. What it means, several things happen. One of the things that happens mainly is that when a child is in the emotionally flooded area, their IQ level drops by 30 points. There's many reasons for this. They're in flight, fight, or freeze. With ADHD people, there are 4 areas: flight, fight, freeze, or fib. They tell lies quite quickly. They're not very good lies generally, but they will. This is where the dog has eaten my homework, or I got stopped by terrorists on the way to school, or some other fantasy is made up to avoid coming out with a reasonable excuse for what might have happened. So the IQ level, when you're in flight or fight, drops because you need to be able to think quicker. And so the amygdala takes over, it hijacks the brain, and what happens is everything's functioned through the amygdala, which is a very quick reaction. This is how people get stuck on phobias and having phobic responses, and panic attacks can happen. It's all in here. The second thing that happens that concerns us really well is that our throats will dry up because in flight or fight, we will have to run or fight is what we think. It's a life-threatening situation and we need to cool down. And the only way we can cool down is by sweating. So the body holds on to any liquid it can access so that it can use it as sweat. That means things in our stomach, our bladder and our bowel are just seen as excess weight, and there's a tendency for people to just want to let go. So, at times of highly emotional states, people will want to go to the toilet more often. People might feel that they want to vomit. It's a complicated area. The third one is important because it affects our hearing. And the latest understanding for me is that there are 4 levels of hearing, 4 different tones, if you like. And what happens is that in flight or fight, the middle 2 tones shut off, and we're left with the very high notes and the very low notes. So the screaming, yelling, and the fear notes are what's left, because we need some sound, but we don't need all the sound to know what's happening. So our hearing is reduced by about 30%, which is quite a lot. Now, as it goes up, we get to this point here. This is called the release. I think of it as the release. It's where the child just wants to explode. It's too intense, there's too much happening, and they just want to let go. Doors are slammed, people swear, sometimes people might be hit, someone might run away. More acting out people might be yelling and shouting and screaming. More acting in people might be hiding under a chair or at a table or in a quiet, safe place. We just need to know the child we're working with to understand how they're going. And then it should be okay. Now, that's got repercussions for later, which I'll come back to. The main thing here is at this point, because the flight and fight is taken into account, the child will start to come down the emotional level, but it will only take a very small trigger to come to an explosion, another explosion, or another explosion. So there's a whole series of explosions that can happen. And it can be just over something ridiculous, an eyebrow raised, a comment, a sigh. It could be anything. But that can go on and on and on and on. So sometimes if you've seen an event that's happened over, say, an hour, you think it's one event, it's probably a whole series of explosions, mini explosions that are adding up to that whole time. It's really crucial to know that. So what we need to do is we need to build in some time so that the emotional level can come down here. And as it comes down, we're getting out of the emotionally flooded zone, and more of the brain is available for thinking and hearing and speaking. So to get from the release down to here, the slump, this is where you feel bad. The child might have an interaction at school, leave, maybe yelling and shouting at staff as they're leaving, and then they'll come into this slump, and this is where they might feel bad about what's happened. I just swore at my best friend, I tore my work up, I pushed my teacher, whatever it is, they might feel bad about it. However, this could be happening 2 to 4 hours after the event, which means that something could happen in school and the children could be home while they're processing what's happened that they didn't like about it. This is really, really crucial. It's a difficult area, and it's useful to remember this could be happening out of our sight. So if something happens at 1 o'clock here, this might be happening at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock at home. Now, the child then comes out of slump, goes along and starts tootling along at their normal emotional level. However, some children come in, and when they're triggered, it's a really steep rise. They come up, they have the release, all these things are happening, and then they can come down. However, this group of children sometimes don't go into the slump. They just drop down and carry on as normal. We need to be aware of that. We need to be able to process, this is the event, this is what's happening. And that's where the skill of understanding and knowing the child. You may talk about this later, or the child might not even be concerned about it. Everything might seem okay. Now, interestingly enough, this area, the common adult teaching point, is when the adults come in. There's been an event in the classroom or something like that, and then adults, we go over and we say, now what were you thinking about? What's our school rules? We've talked about this before. What you needed to do was this, this, and this. And we're talking to them, we're asking them questions, but they're here at the common adult teaching point. And this is where IQ levels are down, hearing's down, their throat is dry, so their speech is in a problem, and yet we're asking them to do some thinking and talk about it. It's quite difficult. So that's just a quick review here. And you can see how it must be incredibly difficult for people to be here and to be asked these complicated questions. Now, the interesting thing is that this is happening for the child in the class. But when there's one child in the class going through this, every person in that room is also on this. They may be slightly lower, they may even be higher, we don't know. But everybody in the room, including all the adults, will be going through this graph. It's a fairly common graph of events, and this is what we go through. So the adults in the room may not be thinking very well. They may not be hearing very well, and they may not even be able to speak comfortably. And if you think about it, think of the last job interview you went for. Did you notice that there was a glass of water at the table when you went in? Because you're in a flight or fight situation, you're emotionally flooded, and they're acknowledging that by giving you a glass of water so that you can speak. Any kind of interviews, there's usually a glass of water around, and we understand that it's a difficult time. The other thing that happens as we're coming up here, and we're coming up this path, is our body changes, but one of the things that changes most noticeably is the breathing. The breathing should come from the abdomen, way down here. As we're going up that, the breathing comes from the top, so it's... When you breathe that way, you're flooding the body with oxygen, which floods the system, and it lets your brain know, high oxygen content, I'm under attack. So I need to survive. And that's where the brain switches over, starts releasing adrenaline and cortisol, and the survival techniques kick in. And by coming down, the body starts to regain and stops producing adrenaline and cortisol. It starts to simply produce the normal emotional level. So that's a brief overview, very quickly, of what happens with ourselves and with the children during different events. I'm hoping it's been helpful, and I'm hoping it can be useful as a way of understanding some of the things that may be excuse me. I'm in the emotionally flooded zone, so my throat is drying up, and that's starting to kick in for me, because I can kind of feel my thoughts are not as comfortable and as easy as they should be. Okay, everybody, I hope it makes sense. I look forward to hearing any comments from you. Bye-bye.